Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Episode 4 of my firewood processor build. In this episode I'm going to be building the chainsaw. This is the clutch that'll run off the front side of the engine. I'm just making basically a washer for the front side that'll go down inside the hub a little further, since the shaft is probably a good inch short of the outside edge of the hub. This is the axle shaft that'll drive the chainsaw. The shaft is a 1-inch shaft. The sprocket for the chainsaw is 25 millimeters, so I had to turn it down some. Overshot it on the first try, so I had to cut that basically half-inch off and try again. So this pass I just took little bites, just turned it down and kept trying it to make sure I didn't overshoot it. So the 1-inch shaft has a 1/4-inch keyway. The chainsaw sprocket had a 8 millimeter keyway. So I just used an end mill and did a 5/16 cut keyway, and that was pretty much perfect as far as the width, and then I just had to set my depth. I'm just touching down off the top and then making sure that I'm only cutting down so far, and I got it pretty close. For not being a machinist, I felt like I did a pretty good job on it. I drilled the end and tapped it so that I could put a washer with a bolt to hold the sprocket. I took some measurements of the bar for the clamp part and did basically a rough cutout for how big I wanted it to be. Now I'm just doing some transfer punch for where some of the hardware will be. I'm not sure why I did a transfer punch through the oiling hole. There's nothing that goes on this part for that. Now I'm narrowing it down further. Make sure it has clearance for the chain, everything like that. In hindsight, I shouldn't have cut that part out until I was done drilling all my holes, but now I'm doing my layout for the chain adjuster, which I end up doing I just bored a slot through it, and I took this piece here, drilled a hole through it at my right depth and width, so that I could just run a bolt through the clamp and use this part as my adjuster. I think this slot ended up being, it was about a 1/2 inch wide. So the piece I'm gonna mount the bar on, I need to add thickness right where the bar went, so that I could get the bar center at least up to the point where I could center it with the sprocket and not have the sprocket touching anything. So I just use a scrap piece of 3/16. Yeah, I drilled my holes in that piece first. I think mainly so I could make sure it was on the center line. And it was just easier marking that. Cleaned it up, I'll weld that piece on, and I just drilled the rest of the way through the 3/16 piece using the marks I already had. I'm just removing any metal that I don't need to be there. I don't think the chain would have contacted it, but figured I might as well just remove it. It's not going to do me any good to have it there. I'm marking out for the oiling channel. I basically just made that as much length as I needed, no matter how far I moved the bar. I'm just milling it out with a round end mill. Here's what happens when you don't pay attention to where your light is. The holes I drilled in this, I just basically lined it up and transfer punched it. Somehow it was right. Pretty surprised, but now I'm just marking my center line, and I'm drilling out the hole where the shaft will come through the bar. These holes I drilled, I think it was a 31/32. It was just under a half-inch bit. I'm going to put half-inch bolts in. And I basically just cut the heads and then turn them down just slightly enough that they're a friction fit in the hole. And they were also recessed and pointed on the end so that I could weld them from the backside, because I didn't have any room for bolts to be sticking out, or bolt heads to be sticking out on the other side because of the chainsaw sprocket. This is the clamp piece. I cut it down to my final dimensions, and now I'm just drilling a hole from one end to the other in that slotted channel. I'm doing my measurements for my adjuster so I can get the depth set. cut the piece on the bandsaw, milled it down to the proper length, and then I milled the end piece that actually goes down in the bar, because it was slightly smaller than what the whole piece was. The bolt I had threaded the whole length, and then I'm just putting a lock nut at that end, so no matter which way I turn it, the bolt won't move in any direction. It'll just stay and move the slide or the adjuster. Just welding in the studs for that bearing. And then for the bolts for the bar itself, I left the heads on them and just weld them. They're not going to be in the way of anything. I did cut section out of the end of this plow on that side because of it contacting the saw mechanism. With the bearings being self-centering, I had to do 2 bearings right at the saw just to keep everything square. And I was hoping it would give me enough, make it rigid enough that I didn't have to end up supporting the saw at the other end, which I do here later in the video. So I made a little cardboard template so that I could trace these out, cut these. And this is where I'll mount the braces for the bearings for the drive shaft all the way across. So I just welded 2 pieces of the 3-inch C-channel together for my bearing mount. My original plan was 3 bearings. The center one gapped a little bit. And the more I thought about it, it didn't seem like I really needed to have 3 in there, because I don't think the shaft's really going to move that much in that little bit of space. It's probably a little over 2 feet between the outside bearings. So I needed to make a washer, or actually a spacer, because of only having the, going from 25.4 millimeters down to 25, there wasn't much of a lip there for the sprocket. So I just made a spacer that would go in between the sprocket and the bearing. And that would at least give it something positive to push against. I also made another spacer between the bearings on the processor and the bearing on the saw, I was kind of hoping that would give me would make it rigid enough to not have to support the saw on the other side of the chainsaw sprocket. Here I'm making a washer for the end of the chainsaw sprocket, and the center portion had to be recessed slightly just because the shaft sticks out just a little bit. So I just cut kind of like a bowl into this washer. Yeah, I did try parting it. Machine's not rigid enough to part, so I ended up having to cut it off with the chain, or with the bandsaw. Here I'm making an adjuster for the chainsaw stop when it comes down. Just welded a lock nut into some square tubing. Cut that so it'd fit in the valley of that L channel in the plow, and then welded it in. And here's where I noticed the bounce. I was afraid there was going to be some flex there. I was hoping it wouldn't be bad, but it was definitely way too much. So I'm going to have to support the saw out further. But I didn't want to lose the ability to be able to remove the chain without taking anything apart. So I'm just going to basically support it through a gap with a pin that it can rotate on. And I just pushed the shaft all the way through. That way I could mark where the hole needed to be. original plan with the support piece was I was just going to weld a piece in top and bottom of the back frame rail, but then I realized if I did that, I would probably not be able to get the saw back off. And if I could, it wouldn't be very easy to do, so I ended up going this route where I bolted it in. Still had a little bit of bounce. I thought maybe if I put the pin in, weld that, it might take it away, but it still flexed a little too much that I didn't know if it would cause any issues, so I ended up adding another brace here later on. It created a new problem. Not that it's a big deal. That was never at its finished length, so I have to cut it down anyways. Here I'm just cutting the window open a little more in where I put the chain. Finish welding that shaft in for the support. That's pretty much it for this episode. I'm just gonna do some finish welding. Next episode will probably be some miscellaneous stuff. I might get the engine mounted up so I can figure out my belt size. I started working on the shafts for the chain, for the infeed chain, cutting the keyways in them and welding the sprockets onto the hubs. And I'll probably work on the log clamp, because I need to get that made up so I can figure out what size cylinder I need to finish, or so I can start ordering my hydraulics. So, thanks for watching this one. Subscribe. That way you'll know when the next episode comes out. Sort of getting there. There's still a lot of work to do, but it's getting somewhere. So, thanks for watching.